The sanctity of human life is under assault. Find out how and what you can do about it in this edition of Life Matters with Brian Johnston, Western Regional Director of the National Right to Life Committee. Brian Johnston is the Western Director of the National Right to Life Committee. He has served in many capacities while advocating for innocent lives, as California Commissioner on Aging, as Chairman of the California Pro-Life Council, on the board of the National Legal Center for the Medically Dependent and Disabled. And now here's our host, Brian Johnston.
Welcome back to Life Matters. We're your program on the right to life, on the culture that emanates from that very specific idea. It is an idea of political philosophy about the duty of government to protect the innocent. We can talk about that battle of ideas that emanates from that. This year we saw the Republican Party of California take a shellacking, and many people don't understand why that's happened. I can tell you. It's because many of the leadership in the Republican Party do not understand what the Republican Party is and what it stands for. Arnold Schwarzenegger is a case in point. The media may not have told you this, but Arnold Schwarzenegger abandoned the Republican Party not long after holding office. He had said he was pro-life as he took office. He said he was a committed Republican. But in point of fact, he did not understand the basic ideas and why they have to be fought for. Shortly after taking office, he appointed as his chief of staff the executive director of the state's Democrat Party. That's right. She also happened to be the former director of California Abortion Rights Action League. Her name was Susan Kennedy. And from then on, the Republican administration of Arnold Schwarzenegger began to dismantle Republican politics in California. One of the most sweeping was his avid support for Proposition 14, what's known as the jungle primary. It has gone on to devastate California and help make it into a one-party state. That's right. The tragedy is that even years later, when the Republican Party had an opportunity to re-examine this, the leadership of the Republican Party did not want to repeal Proposition 14. It did not want to assert the two-party system in California. How could that be? Well, here's the shorthand. A lot of people view politics as a chance at self-advancement. They don't see that, more importantly, it's the battle of ideas. And if you're not committed to principles, if you're not committed to ideas, if you're not committed to stand earnestly for those ideas, you will fall. And that's what's happened in California. There are many other examples. You can go to our blog and find out more at californiaprolife.org. The new voting systems in California have been greatly tilted to allow illegal votes, not just by illegal voters from other countries. That apparently is happening. But same-day voting, that literally you can go in and you don't have to show an ID and you can vote. This dramatic change in our voting system and the undercutting of the public's duty to be involved in civics has had a great price for California and for California's Republican Party. Hopefully there'll be a reformation of this party. But it's an attack on the party across the nation. So when we come back, we're going to talk about the foundations. What are the principles of the Republican Party? They're rather extraordinary. They began at the beginning of this nation. What are the principles of the Democrat Party? You may see the symptoms of both of these parties, but if you don't understand the principles, you're not going to understand the battle of ideas. When we come back, we're going to talk about the principles of the political parties.
Life Matters continues after this.
Hi, I'm Kevin Sorbo, and I was very excited when I heard about LifeFest Film Festival. LifeFest is the film festival dedicated to showcasing films that affirm the intrinsic worth of innocent human life and the profound significance of each life. One seemingly insignificant person can in fact change the whole world in which he or she lives. That one singular life ends up being of vital importance. I'm so glad to hear that you are cherishing that in this film festival and are committed to artfully and creatively protect the lives of those who can't possibly promote themselves.
Life Film Fest is dedicated to bring the message of life to Hollywood and to our culture. Go to lifefilmfest.com and get your tickets now. That's lifefilmfest.com.
Find out about the exciting cultural change impacting Hollywood. Go to lifefilmfest.com. And now back to more Life Matters with Brian Johnston.
Well, welcome back. We're talking about the Republican Party and why the pro-life movement needs the Republican Party. Many people don't understand party politics in America, and many Republicans don't also. So it's important now to spend a little time. We're going to drill down to what the significance of the Republican Party is, and most especially its history. Abraham Lincoln could never have stopped slavery were it not for the Republican Party. The Civil War, as you probably know, was merely to save the Union, to keep the Union from splitting in two. But that is not what ended slavery. And there's an excellent film. It's by Steven Spielberg. It's called Lincoln. And in it, it depicts the actual act that ended slavery, the 13th Amendment, and the very important political activity surrounding that, the effort by the Republican Party to ensure that the law, once again, respected innocent lives, to ensure that this was not merely a difference of opinion, and that's sometimes a factor in political debates. At that time, regarding slavery, half of the nation said, well, this is part of our culture. This is simply what we've been given. It's part of the economic system. But those in the North said, but you're doing it on the backs of others. So from the very beginning in the United States, slavery has always been an issue. But it was only with the 13th Amendment that slavery could come to an end. And it was only through the Republican Party, but I have found many Republicans that don't know that don't understand where the Republican Party came from and how it came into existence almost overnight. A miraculous overnight transformation. And we're going to talk about that for a little bit because that's the only way we're going to change the laws to once again protect innocent lives on the issue of abortion. Before 1973, the laws in every state protected innocent lives in the womb. And this is a very important factor in our legal system. The right to life was the premise for that. And here on Life Matters, we talk about the fact that the right to life is a phrase that we have borrowed directly from America's founding documents. But it's just not a phrase. It's a very important legal principle declaring the duty of government to protect the lives of the governed. And this issue is the predicate that we need to understand if we're going to once again protect the innocent vulnerable. It has to be through the legal process. As Abraham Lincoln himself said, we must do this through ballots and not bullets. That's the only way to change this. You're probably aware as well, I've written on it, that Abraham Lincoln was himself not an abolitionist, because an abolitionist simply opposed slavery by any means. Lincoln was much more precise. He said, no, we must use ballots and not bullets. There were abolitionists of many stripes. Many of them wanted to use civil disobedience. Some actually took up arms. They were abolitionists. They wanted to end slavery. But it was only Abraham Lincoln and the Republican Party that said, no, we're going to do it through the legal process so that this will never come back. This is critical to understand. It's only through the legal process, through the passing of laws, that these children can be protected, just as it was the laws that protected slaves from the oppression they had been under. So we're going to spend some time right now talking about the history of the Republican Party. I know many Republicans that have no idea what their history is, where it came from, or why. So we're going to start at the very beginning of the nation, and by the time we're done here, we're not going to spend a lot of time, but you're going to see that bright red line that reaches through our nation's history up until the 13th Amendment and beyond, up until this moment, because the Republican Party is built on the basic principles of America's founding. And this is important to recognize, that the principles of America's founding have been with us all along. And these were not merely old white guys, as you're hearing from a lot of the pseudo-academic institutions these days. These were people dedicated to principles and to establishing justice and ensuring domestic tranquility. And there were tools that they put into place, tools that we can still use. That is to say, the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution itself, and all of the mechanisms of the Constitution. We must learn what they are and why they're important. So I'll spend a little time talking about the history of our nation and how that thread led through the Republican Party. It allowed Abraham Lincoln and the Republicans at that time to get Democrat votes. They actually got Democrat votes in order to end slavery. But it was the principles of the Republican Party that allowed that to happen. And as we go, you'll see some parallels for right now, how the Democrat Party, in a sense, hasn't changed in the broadest sense. We're going to start with the founders, and the founding party of America's founders were the patriotic Whigs. And then later, they became the Federalists. And any of you who've read the Federalist Papers, that was for the adoption of the Constitution, it's hammered out, it's spelled out the details of the Constitution, why it was needed, why we needed a federalized government to ensure the ongoing principles. And so that was the Federalist Party. But the patriotic Whigs, they were not named after the British Whigs. They simply were asserting that we are patriots and we believe in basic principles. Later, there would be the Democrat Party. And I'm going to spend a little time talking about the origins of the Democrat Party when we come back. Because if you don't understand the origins of the Democrat Party and the origins of the Republican Party, it's going to be harder for you to really grasp the battle of ideas that are swirling around you right now. So we'll come back and we'll talk about the Whigs, the Democrats, and the ending of slavery.
Life Matters continues after this.
Well, hi. I just wanted to thank you for joining me. You know, I have good friends, children, young adults, and adults that have Down syndrome. And they are so loved. Their parents love them so much because they're the happiest people you'd ever want to know. I really love them. I'm going to tell you something, though, that's rather frightening. The government of France has now prohibited showing positive images of Down syndrome children and letting parents know how lovable they are. That's an actual law in France. Here in the U.S., 80-some-odd% of Down syndrome kids are killed by abortion before they're born. In France, it's 96%. So we're not a whole lot better. If you'd like to help out, you can go to the National Down Syndrome Society, ndss.org, to help out. That's ndss.org. We really are in a battle of ideas, and lives really are at stake.
And now back to more Life Matters with Brian Johnston.
So welcome back. We're talking about the origins of the Republican Party, the importance of a political party in order to change the laws, for people to work together in the legal sphere, in the political sphere, in order to change a nation's laws. And that was what Lincoln was committed to. He said he's committed to ballots and not bullets. And we're looking now at a situation in our nation that still parallels what happened with the slavery issue. It was the ballots of the Republican Party that ended slavery. Again, the Civil War merely prevented the breaking up of the nation. It still had to go to a vote whether or not slavery would continue. And so I want you to know that the Whig Party had a substantial position in American politics with the rise of all people, its counterpoint under Jackson, the Democrat Party. Because at the beginning of our nation, patriotic Whigs and then the Federalists agreed to a truce. That is to say, they weren't going to try to end slavery right away because they didn't have the votes. Half of the nation was against slavery and the other half actually employed slavery. And this was a very difficult time for our nation. It's always been with us. I hope you realize that Franklin himself was a member of an anti-slavery society in Pennsylvania. And in fact, up into the time of the Civil War, records show there were more anti-slavery organizations in the southern states than there were in the northern states. So this attitude towards slavery was very much with us. Even in the South, there were people who did not like slavery. So this battle went back and forth. And why was it an important battle? Because it had to do with the very nature of the human person and the nature of the law. And specifically, as Abraham Lincoln said, it had to do with the right to life. Because under slavery, if a human being could be owned, the owner could actually take the life of that slave, that other human being. That human being was mere chattel. And in a moment, we'll get to 1857, where a Supreme Court decision reinforced that. But that was also what happened in Roe v. Wade, where the Supreme Court said, well, here's a human baby, but we think it's not worthy of protection. It's chattel. It is a possession of the mother. And that has led to the conflict that we see, the conflict in the nature of the law. Should the law protect vulnerable human lives? As I said, Andrew Jackson actually played a role in a lot of this. Andrew Jackson was an individual bigger than life. He was from the South, as you know, and he was a slave owner. And he sadly wanted to expand slavery. And this was an ongoing debate in the United States, as I said, from the beginning. And this debate continued on. And so the Democrat Party, under the Tennessee president, Andrew Jackson, wanted to expand the nation, but also expand slavery. This did not go over well with many other Americans, even in the South. And a new political party came into existence. They did not want to go to war over this, but they did want to limit slavery, as had been the principles of the Constitution. To limit slavery, to actually, subtly, the Constitution acknowledged that black slaves were indeed somewhat human. They got the 2/3 vote in terms of representation. They couldn't vote, but the South enjoyed it because it gave them more population, and the North enjoyed it because it was a recognition that these are human beings, at least to a degree. And so these compromises were moving forward. So in 1831, in order to blunt the Democrat Party, Henry Clay started the Whig Party. The Whigs were dedicated to stopping what the Democrat Party was trying to do. In particular, the Whig Party was dedicated to restraining slavery in its growth, to not allow slavery to continue to grow as the nation was growing. The Democrats didn't like that. They embraced a much more aggressive view of slavery. I'd like to read to you from a historian, Frank Towers, and this is what he said to specify the very deep ideological divide. Democrats stood for the sovereignty of the people, as expressed in popular democracies, demonstrations, constitutional conventions, whereas Whigs advocated the rule of law, written and unchanging constitutions, and protections for minority interests against majority tyranny. And you can see that even today, that a lot of Democrats want a group to support what they want to do. And if they have enough votes, 50 plus 1, well, that should be the law. And if you're a minority, then too bad, because we have power and we're going to make this happen. And this is almost raw democracy without any definitive limits, what some have called a kind of a mob mentality. But the Whigs didn't go for that. They felt an obligation towards the founding documents. So in 1831, Henry Clay, he was a senator. He never did win his attempts at president, but he did help rally the nation under the Whig banner, and that continued for many years. You should know this, that Abraham Lincoln himself was an active Whig Party member. His desire was to limit slavery under the Constitution, and he did so. And one of the most important things you could do if you want to do real research on the slavery debate, on the nature of the Republican Party, is read the Lincoln-Douglas debates. And I recommend in particular the debate at Alton, Illinois, where Lincoln has to define what the Republican Party is and how the Republicans were not wild-eyed people doing anything. The Lincoln-Douglas debate was hugely significant for two reasons. All of this compromise and restriction, starting in the 1830s, there was the Compromise of 1830, the Great Compromise of 1850, the Missouri Compromise. This kept slavery at bay. This was an agreement that there'd be no slavery north of the Mason-Dixon line, that if states came into the Union, you'd have to have two that came in at a time, one slave and one free, so that there would not be an imbalance in the Senate. This was critical. But something changed. The first was a decision of 1857 by the Supreme Court. In 1857, the Supreme Court said, you can have slavery in the free states. You may not realize, but that's what the Dred Scott decision did. It said that if you own a human being in a slave state and you go into a free state, well, too bad for that free state. That's still a slave. And so you could, if you will, you could own slaves in a free state. This was a hugely significant decision, reaffirming slavery and its expansion. The second huge cause of problems was also in 1857, and it was from the very same Senator Douglas, a Northerner. Senator Douglas was a Northern Democrat, and he liked to say that he was not pro-slavery. Oh, no. He was pro-choice. He thought each of the states should choose whether or not to embrace slavery. He didn't think the Missouri Compromise or any of these agreements were appropriate. If slavery wanted to expand, he was all for it. This was a man from Illinois. And as you know, this did not go over well, and Abraham Lincoln decided to run against him. Abraham Lincoln, kind of a minor player at that time, and considered an underdog, and he indeed lost that race for Senate, but he made the case. And if you read the debate at Alton, Illinois, it's very powerful. And Douglas is very powerful in putting forward the pro-choice argument for slavery, in putting forward the right for people to choose whether or not to own slaves. He said he personally abhorred it. Perhaps you've heard that before. But Douglas said we should let people vote if their state should be free or slave. And he had introduced the Kansas-Nebraska Act. If you know your American history, that was the beginning of the Civil War, bleeding Kansas, because there was wartime skirmishes over what kind of state each would be. Would it be a free state or a slave state? And it's very important to understand that. So Douglas said he was pro-choice. And in the debate, he said, Lincoln, you're causing problems. You're going to cause a civil war. You're the problem, Lincoln, because how can you dare say that slavery is not constitutional when half of the signers of the Constitution own slaves? You're a hypocrite, Mr. Lincoln. You're a troublemaker. You're a moralist. And he went on. He said, you're just like those guys from Harper's Ferry. They're starting a war. If you don't know what Harper's Ferry was, that's where John Brown thought he would create a slave uprising, and he armed slaves in the hope that that would throw off the shackles of slavery. Again, abolitionism believed in doing anything because slavery was so bad. There's all sorts of ideas. Now, they may have been well-meaning. Some of them were very problematic, as John Brown found out. He was executed for that. But the problem is that that was put on all opponents of slavery. And in the debate, after he'd been slandered and attacked by Douglas, Mr. Lincoln said something very interesting. He said, Mr. Douglas, if you are to look into the Harper's Ferry event, you will find that no one there was a Republican. I found that extraordinary. But if you understand what the Republican Party is, it's common sense. Because the Republican Party is dedicated, it was and is now dedicated to using the law and legal methods, not into creating confusion and uprising and civil disobedience, but instead using the law to protect those that can't protect themselves. And this is critically important. He knew it. None of those, because that's the opposite of what a Republican was. Again, Abraham Lincoln had been a Whig, committed to the principles of the founding of the nation. But when slavery started to expand and push itself into Kansas and Nebraska, when the Dred Scott decision said we're going to expand slavery, that's when the Republican Party was formed, basically saying, look, we can no longer hold this back. This is a great evil. We must vote it out. And that's what started the Republican Party. You need to understand that. Some people say it started in Jackson, Michigan. I was there at that particular place to see it. Other places in Michigan also claim to be the origin of the Republican Party. But you need to know it was really the Whigs that said the Whig position is not enough now. They've become aggressive. The pro-death, pro-slavery people are aggressive. We must now vote it out. We must end slavery. And the Republican Party was born. So it's important that you recognize that. Even Abraham Lincoln was not the first presidential nominee of the Republican Party. That actually falls to a Californian, Captain John Fremont. John Fremont was the first to run for president as a Republican, but as you know, it was the election of Abraham Lincoln that terrified the South They started the war when they saw that Lincoln had been elected. And again, that was by votes in the South and the North. They had voted for a Republican president. That terrified the South. They became known as the Resistance. Perhaps that sounds familiar. The Resistance. They were going to resist the change in the commitment to principles. They wanted to use force if need be to go along with their cultural values. And so you still see that distinction between the roots of republicanism, which is based on the Constitution and definitive rules that protect the minority, that protect the principles our nation is built on, and the Democrat leanings, which is basically, if you have a simple majoritarian attitude, if we get enough people to say yes, we can do what we want. The other thing that Jackson did, speaking back of President Jackson, it alarmed many people. Not only did he view slaves as property, but he was notorious for actually having overseen agreements with the Indians and then intentionally violating those agreements. And even the Disney film about Davy Crockett, many young kids will remember that. That's retained in that film, that Davy Crockett was deeply, deeply offended after having helped stop the Indian Wars, that the American government under Andrew Jackson simply dismissed the Indians, again, as mere things to be dismissed. And the agreement with the Indians had not been honored. So Jackson was a very imperious man, but he used majoritarian principles, which can be very, very dangerous. In summation, the Republican Party is not merely the party of Rolex and Rolls-Royce money. It's not the party of low taxation because I want to keep my money. In fact, if you were really to look at today's Democrat Party, many of the leaders of the Democrat Party are extremely wealthy. Many of them are the Wall Street billionaires. You already know that in Silicon Valley. You already know that in Hollywood. That the Democrat Party, if anything, is the party of money. And the fact is I'm not objecting to that, people having money if they've earned it. But what are the core principles on which a political party is based? Our political system is facing a great challenge, and with the right to life, we are asserting a basic premise of our nation. The right to life is an assertion that every human life deserves legal protection by the government. If they're innocent, it's essential in order to have a just government. And the Republican Party has asserted that. So if you know Republicans that don't get it, please remind them of their true principles. And if you are challenged in having to deal with politics, remember, it really is ultimately a battle of ideas. And if you're not ready for this battle of ideas, then you are going to lose. It is not merely our sentiments. It is not merely our feelings. It is not merely the fact that we like babies that we will change the laws. We must work to change the laws if we want to see legal protection for children once again.
Life Matters is a production of the California Pro-Life Council, the state affiliate of National Right to Life.